Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into a collection of sayings and stories from early Islamic tradition
Right.
that touch upon a truly complex subject,
Yeah.
the emancipation of slaves.
Wow.
We'll be exploring selections from the Sunan Abu Dawud Hadith,
Right.
specifically Book 24,
Okay.
aptly titled Book of Emancipation of Slaves.
It's a fascinating look into how a society grappling with the deeply ingrained institution of slavery
Right.
sought to reform and ultimately dismantle it.
Yeah.
And remember, this was a time when slavery was unfortunately a global norm.
Right. It's easy to judge the past through the lens of our modern values.
Yeah.
But I think it's far more illuminating to try to understand the context and see how within that context there were efforts to push for change even back then.
Absolutely. And that's what makes these texts so compelling. They
Yeah.
don't shy away from the complexities. You
Yeah.
see legal rulings, ethical dilemmas, personal stories, all woven together to paint a picture of how Islamic teachings aim to transform the institution of slavery from within.
Okay, let's jump right in. One of the first things we encounter in this collection is the concept of mukatab.
Right.
What exactly is that?
Mukatab was essentially a contract that offered a pathway to freedom for enslaved individuals.
Oh,
It allowed them to earn their freedom by making agreed-upon payments to their master over a period of time.
so a way to literally buy their way out of slavery.
Precisely.
Wow.
And what's fascinating is that the Hadiths get very specific about the terms of these contracts.
Okay.
For example, Hadiths 39:15 and 39:16 make it clear that even if a single dirham, think of it as a small unit of currency back then,
Okay.
remains unpaid, the enslaved person is not considered fully free.
Wow, talk about attention to detail.
Right.
But it really highlights the importance of fulfilling those contractual obligations, both
Yes.
for the enslaved person and the master.
It also gives us a glimpse into the economic realities of that era.
Yeah.
Hadith 316 even mentions other currency units like uqiyas and dinars.
Wow.
It's like a little window into the financial systems that intertwine with slavery.
Okay, so we have this legal framework in place. But beyond the contracts, are there any stories that shed light on how mukatab actually played out in people's lives?
There are some truly compelling examples.
Okay.
One that comes to mind is the story of Barira,
Okay.
a woman who was enslaved but yearned for freedom. She turned to Aisha, the Prophet Muhammad's wife,
Okay.
for help in gaining her freedom.
So Barira was seeking a powerful ally to help her navigate this complex system.
Exactly.
Right.
And this story, as recounted in Hadith 3918 and 3919,
Okay.
raises some really interesting ethical questions.
Okay.
It turns out that Aisha wanted to inherit from Barira, but Islamic principles state that inheritance rights belong only to the person who grants freedom.
So there's this clash between personal desires
Yes.
and those higher principles of justice.
Yes.
That's quite a dilemma.
It is. And the Prophet Muhammad himself stepped in to resolve this conflict.
Okay.
In Hadith 3918, he makes a powerful statement declaring that any conditions or agreements not found in Allah's book are invalid.
So even if an agreement seems reasonable on the surface,
Right.
it can't contradict the fundamental teachings of Islam.
Precisely.
Okay.
And in this case, the Prophet emphasized that the right to inheritance is solely tied to the act of granting freedom.
Okay.
You can't have one without the other.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes personal gain has to take a back seat to upholding those core principles.
Absolutely. And it speaks to the overarching goal of reforming slavery from the inside out, not just accepting it as the status quo.
Now, beyond individual stories like Barrera's,
Yes.
are there any examples of emancipation that had a wider societal impact?
There's one story that's truly remarkable in that regard.
Okay.
It involved Juwayriya, the daughter of Al-Harith,
Yeah.
who eventually became the Prophet Muhammad's wife.
Wait, so the Prophet married a woman who was previously enslaved?
He did, and it's a story worth exploring.
Wow.
Hadith 3920 explains that the Prophet purchased Juwayriya's freedom, and this act had a profound ripple effect throughout the community.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Upon hearing of the marriage, people were deeply moved by the respect and honor shown to Juwayriya.
Okay.
It was seen as a gesture of goodwill toward her entire tribe, the Banu al-Mustalik.
Okay.
And as a result, people began voluntarily releasing their own captives from that tribe.
Wow. So a single act of emancipation sparked this wave of liberation.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's estimated that 100 families were freed because of this. It's a testament to the power of individual actions,
Right.
especially when those actions are connected to influential figures like the Prophet.
It's almost like a domino effect of compassion and justice.
And it shows how these decisions weren't just personal. They had profound social consequences.
Now, things get a bit more complicated when we start talking about situations where a single enslaved person is jointly owned by multiple individuals.
Right.
How did Islamic teachings handle those situations?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Hadiths 3921 through 3937 delve into these complexities, and they showcase how Islamic jurisprudence or legal reasoning evolved over time to address the nuances of partial emancipation.
Partial emancipation.
Right.
So you could free a portion of someone's ownership, but not the whole thing.
It was a way to navigate the realities of a system where ownership of human beings was unfortunately woven into the fabric of society.
Right.
But even within that system, there was this drive to find ways to increase freedom and uphold fairness.
So what kind of rulings or opinions do we see in these hadiths?
Well, some hadiths emphasize the enslaved person's right to complete freedom, even if only one of the multiple owners chooses to emancipate their share.
So even a partial act of liberation could have significant consequences.
Exactly.
Wow.
But then other hadiths allow the remaining owners to require the enslaved person to work in order to compensate them for their remaining share.
So there's this tension between acknowledging the right to freedom and also protecting the financial interests of those involved.
It's a delicate balance, and it's important to remember the economic realities of that time period.
Right.
Ownership of enslaved people was often intertwined with labor and financial systems. So these rulings had to navigate both ethical considerations and practical concerns.
Sounds like a real legal and moral puzzle.
It was. And it speaks to the challenges of implementing social change even when the intentions are good.
Now, I noticed that the outline mentioned some unique situations where a person's freedom is automatically granted.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about those?
Absolutely. Hadiths 3938 through 3941 describe a fascinating scenario. If someone comes into possession of an enslaved person who happens to be a close relative within prohibited degrees of marriage, that enslaved person automatically becomes free.
Wait, so if you inherit a slave who's also your cousin, for instance, they're immediately emancipated?
Precisely.
Wow.
And it makes perfect sense when you think about the wider Islamic emphasis on family ties and the absolute prohibition of incest.
So it's like a safeguard built into the system to prevent those relationships from being exploited within the context of slavery.
Exactly. It reinforces the sanctity of those familial bonds and ensures that slavery can't be used to circumvent fundamental moral boundaries.
That's incredibly insightful.
It shows the interconnectedness of various Islamic principles and how they work together to promote justice and ethical behavior.
And it underscores how these rulings weren't just about abstract legal theory. They were designed to address real-life situations and prevent potential harm. Now, there's another practice mentioned in the outline that I'd like to discuss. The selling of slave mothers. Hadiths 3942 and 3943 suggest that this was initially allowed, but later forbidden. Can you shed some light on this evolution of thought?
This is a really important point because it highlights how Islamic teachings, even on complex social issues, continue to evolve over time toward greater compassion and justice.
So what prompted this change in perspective?
Well, during the Prophet Muhammad's time and the early leadership of Abu Bakr, the practice of selling slave mothers was unfortunately allowed. But during Umar's leadership, a deeper understanding of the potential harm caused by separating families emerged.
It makes sense.
Yes.
Selling a mother away from her children would have been incredibly traumatic and disruptive.
Absolutely. And so Umar, recognizing this profound injustice, decided to prohibit the practice altogether. It's a testament to the ongoing process of reflection and moral growth within Islamic tradition.
It shows that even established practices can be challenged and reformed when there's a greater awareness of the ethical implications.
Precisely. It's a reminder that our understanding of morality and social justice is not static. It can and should continue to evolve as we gain greater insights into the human condition.
Wow.
It's a fascinating journey through history, really.
It is. It is.
And it offers us a lot to reflect on even today.
Absolutely. And I think we should probably take a break here.
Okay.
And come back and dig into some more of these
And
fascinating
unpack, definitely.
nuances of this topic.
Definitely.
So join us next time on Echoes of Ihsan as we continue our deep dive into the world of slave emancipation in Islamic tradition.
Looking forward to it.
See you then.
All right. Bye. Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan.
We're continuing our deep dive into the fascinating world of slave emancipation in Islamic tradition, as detailed in Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 24.
It's a rich text.
Last time we talked about mukatab,
Yes.
contracts that allowed slaves to purchase their freedom, and explored stories like Barir's quest for liberation
Yes.
and the ripple effect of Juwairiya's emancipation on her community.
A powerful example.
We also touched on those complex situations where a slave was jointly owned,
Right.
and how Islamic teachings navigated the tricky issue of partial emancipation.
Such a nuanced topic.
Plus, we examined the safeguards in place to prevent exploitation, like the rule that automatically grants freedom to a slave,
Yes.
who's also a close relative of their owner.
Really fascinating stuff.
There's so much to unpack here, and I'm
Yeah.
eager to delve deeper into the ethical considerations and legal nuances surrounding emancipation.
Absolutely.
It's clear that Islamic teachings aim to reform the institution of slavery from within, rather than just calling for its immediate abolition,
Right.
which might have been met with a lot of resistance back then.
Exactly. It was a strategic approach to social change, working within the existing structures to gradually shift attitudes and practices until slavery became unsustainable.
And one of the key ways this was achieved was by highlighting the immense spiritual and social value of freeing slaves.
Absolutely.
Right? We talked about the concept of kafara earlier.
Yes.
The act of expiation for wrongdoing. Hadiths 3943 and 3954 really emphasize this connection,
Okay.
describing the emancipation of a slave as a way to atone for sins,
Right.
and even as protection from hellfire.
It's almost like elevating the act of emancipation to a level of spiritual purification.
Wow.
By linking it to such profound rewards,
Yeah.
it encourages people to see freeing slaves not just as a moral obligation, but as a path to personal salvation.
It's a powerful incentive for sure.
Definitely.
And it weaves ethical behavior into the very fabric of religious practice,
Right.
making it an integral part of one's spiritual journey.
It's fascinating how the Hadiths also address the financial aspects of emancipation, ensuring fairness for both the enslaved person and the former master.
Absolutely. Hadith 3917 is a great example.
Okay.
It talks about a slave who enters into an agreement to purchase their freedom
Yeah.
and instructs the master, in this case a woman,
Okay.
to veil herself from the slave once the slave has the means to pay the full price.
Oh, interesting.
That's a really interesting detail.
Yeah.
It seems like such a small thing,
Right.
but it signifies a major shift in the relationship.
Absolutely.
The slave is no longer seen solely as property,
Right.
but as someone on the verge of freedom,
Mm-hmm.
deserving of respect and the same standards of modesty as any other free individual.
It's a symbolic recognition of the slave's impending autonomy.
Right.
And speaking of respecting a slave's autonomy, Hadith 3951 is very clear
Okay.
about what happens to a slave's personal property after they are emancipated.
Right. It states that any property belonging to a slave becomes theirs upon emancipation, unless the former master specifically says otherwise. It's a way of preventing the former master from exploiting their previous position of power
Absolutely.
and claiming what rightfully belongs to the freed individual.
It's about ensuring that the freed individual has the resources and financial independence
Right.
to build a new life.
And this idea of safeguarding a slave's rights
Yes.
is a recurring theme throughout the Hadiths.
It is.
We see it time and again in the legal rulings and ethical guidelines surrounding emancipation.
And it goes beyond just material possessions, right?
Right.
We talked about the concept of mutabar,
Yes.
where a slave is promised freedom upon their master's death.
Right. Hadiths 3944, 3946 really emphasize the importance of fulfilling this promise,
Okay.
even if the deceased master's estate is lacking in assets.
Exactly. It's about prioritizing the slave's freedom above any financial considerations.
Yeah.
In one case, the Prophet Muhammad even orders the sale of the mutabar slave
Wow.
to ensure the deceased master's commitment is honored.
That's a powerful testament to the weight given to such promises.
Absolutely.
It shows that the slave's right to freedom isn't extinguished by their master's death,
Right.
but is an obligation that falls upon the community to uphold. It's a collective responsibility to ensure that justice prevails.
And this commitment to justice is evident even in those complicated cases where a master wants to emancipate slaves in their will.
Yes.
But the value of those slaves exceeds 1/3 of the deceased's property.
Right. Hadiths 3947, 3950 offer some intriguing solutions to this dilemma.
They do.
Right. Some scholars advocated for a lottery system
Yeah.
to partially annul the emancipation.
Okay.
So only a portion of the slaves would be freed,
Mm-hmm.
while others argued for upholding the deceased's wishes in full,
Right.
even if it meant a financial sacrifice for the inheritors.
It's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
Trying to find a solution that honors the deceased's intention
Mm-hmm.
while also protecting the rights of the inheritors.
And it highlights the complexities inherent in applying Islamic principles to real-life situations.
Absolutely.
But even amidst these challenging scenarios,
Yeah.
the commitment to finding a just and compassionate solution shines through.
It does.
It's not about blindly adhering to rules,
Right.
but about finding the best possible outcome given the circumstances.
Exactly.
And I want to circle back to the story of Sulama bint Makil al-Qursiya,
Okay.
mentioned in Hadith 3942.
Mm-hmm.
She was a woman sold into slavery before the advent of Islam,
Right.
and later sought help from the Prophet Muhammad.
Interesting.
Her story is relevant to the practice of selling slave mothers,
Okay.
a topic that sparked debate and evolution within Islamic thought.
Her story is a powerful reminder of how personal experiences can drive social change,
Yeah.
and it highlights the complexities of addressing deeply rooted practices,
Mm-hmm.
even within a framework aimed at reform.
If we recall Hadith 300 to 943 states that selling slave mothers was initially permitted
Yes.
during the Prophet's and Abu Bakr's time, but was later forbidden by Umar.
Right.
This shift is incredibly significant.
It is.
It reflects a growing understanding of the importance of family unity
Yes.
and the potential harm caused by separating mothers from their children.
Absolutely.
It's a prime example of how Islamic teachings, even on complex social issues,
Right.
continue to evolve towards greater compassion and justice.
This evolution wasn't about simply upholding the status quo.
Right.
It was about constantly striving for a more just and humane society.
It's a reminder that our understanding of morality and social justice is not static.
Right?
It can and should grow over time as we gain new insights and confront new challenges.
And this principle of ongoing moral growth is applicable not just to the issue of slavery,
Yeah,
but to any social issue we face today.
absolutely.
Principles of compassion, fairness, and a commitment to human dignity are timeless
Yeah,
and transcend any specific historical context.
right.
They offer a framework for addressing a wide range of social concerns.
Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan. We're concluding our deep dive into the world of slave emancipation in Islamic tradition, guided by selections from the Sunan Abu Dawud Hadith, Book 24.
Over the past 2 parts, we've journeyed through narratives of individuals striving for freedom,
Yeah,
delved into the legal and ethical complexities of emancipation,
right.
and witnessed how Islamic thought evolved to address the injustices of slavery.
It's been an incredibly insightful exploration, and I'm ready to tie together some of the key themes we've encountered
Okay.
and perhaps uncover a few more gems of wisdom from these ancient texts.
Absolutely.
One recurring theme that stands out to me is this idea of gradual reform, rather than demanding an immediate and complete end to slavery,
Right.
which might have been met with strong resistance in that historical context.
Yeah.
Islamic teachings focused on changing attitudes and practices from within,
Yes.
making slavery unsustainable in the long run.
It was a strategic and frankly brilliant approach to social change.
Right.
Instead of just attacking the institution head on, which could have led to further entrenchment, the focus was on chipping away at its foundations.
Right.
Slowly but surely.
And one of the key tools used to achieve this was elevating the act of freeing slaves
Yes.
to a deeply spiritual level.
Absolutely.
Right. We saw how the Hadiths repeatedly connected the emancipation of slaves with the atonement of sins and even protection from hellfire.
It's as if freeing a slave became a pathway to spiritual purification
Yeah.
and a way to secure one's place in the hereafter.
Exactly. It's not just about doing what's right in society's eyes.
Right.
It's about aligning yourself with divine will and earning spiritual rewards.
Yes, by weaving ethical behavior into the very fabric of religious practice.
Right.
It becomes more than just a moral obligation. It becomes a central part of one's relationship with the divine.
And this approach likely had a profound impact on how people viewed slavery.
I think so.
It's no longer just an economic system or a social norm.
Hmm.
It carries this weight of spiritual consequence,
Yes.
influencing people's actions and choices on a deeper level.
Absolutely.
Right.
And by emphasizing these immense rewards associated with emancipation,
Right.
it encourages people to see freeing slaves not just as something they should do,
Right.
but as something they want to do,
Mm-hmm.
a pathway to personal salvation and fulfillment.
Yeah.
It's a truly ingenious strategy for social change.
Another aspect that I found fascinating is the meticulous attention to detail
Yes.
in safeguarding the rights of slaves throughout the process of emancipation.
Absolutely.
The Hadiths don't just focus on the grand act of freeing someone.
Right.
They delve into the specifics of ensuring that freedom is truly meaningful and lasting.
Yes, and it's in these details that we see the compassion and justice at the heart of this approach.
Mm-hmm.
Remember Hadith 3917, where a master is instructed to veil themselves from a slave about to purchase their freedom?
Yeah.
It's a subtle gesture,
Right.
but it signifies a recognition of the slave's impending transition to a new social status,
Mm-hmm.
a status deserving of respect and dignity.
And Hadith 3951, which states that any property owned by a slave becomes theirs upon emancipation,
Right.
unless the former master explicitly states otherwise.
Ensures that.
Ensures that the freed individual has the means to build a new life and isn't left vulnerable to exploitation.
Right. It's about recognizing that true freedom goes beyond just the absence of chains.
Right.
It includes the ability to control one's own destiny and have a fair shot at a good life. And this commitment to safeguarding a slave's rights extends even beyond the grave.
The concept of mutabar is a powerful example of this.
Yes.
The Hadiths we discussed, numbers 3944 to 3946,
Right.
emphasize the importance of fulfilling the promise of freedom made to a mutabar slave, even after the master's death, regardless of the financial situation.
It highlights the sacredness of that promise and shows that a slave's right to freedom isn't extinguished by their master's death.
Right.
It becomes a communal responsibility to ensure that justice is served.
It's a remarkable testament to the value placed on honoring commitments
Yeah.
and upholding the dignity of every individual, regardless of their circumstances.
Absolutely.
Now, we also encountered instances where the Hadiths presented different opinions or rulings on certain issues,
Okay.
like the complex scenario of emancipating slaves in a will when their value exceeded 1/3 of the deceased property.
Right. Hadiths 3,947 to 3,950
Yes.
provide a fascinating glimpse into the debates and nuances within Islamic jurisprudence.
Right. Some scholars favored a lottery system to partially fulfill the emancipation,
Yes.
balancing the deceased's wishes with the inheritor's rights.
Others emphasized upholding the deceased's intention in full,
Right.
even if it meant a financial sacrifice for the heirs.
These differing viewpoints remind us that the application of Islamic principles is not always straightforward.
No, it's not.
It requires thoughtful consideration of the context,
Right.
weighing various factors and striving to achieve a just outcome.
Exactly. And it underscores the role of human judgment and interpretation in applying these principles to real-life situations. There's no one-size-fits-all answer, and the Hadiths themselves reflect this complexity.
But even amidst these diverse opinions, what shines through is the underlying commitment to fairness, compassion,
Yes.
and the well-being of the enslaved individuals involved.
It's a reminder that the goal is not to blindly follow rules, but to arrive at a solution that upholds the highest ethical standards.
And it's important to remember that the conversation about slavery and emancipation didn't end with the Hadiths.
It didn't.
Subsequent generations of scholars continue to grapple with these issues,
Yes.
refining and expanding upon the foundational teachings.
As social norms changed and awareness of human rights grew, so too did Islamic perspectives on slavery.
It's a powerful reminder that religious traditions are not static.
Right.
They can and should evolve and adapt to new knowledge and moral understandings.
Absolutely. A continuous process of reflection, growth, and striving towards a more just and compassionate world.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey.
It has.
And I hope our listeners have gained a deeper understanding of the nuanced and compassionate approach to slave emancipation within Islamic tradition.
It's a topic that continues to spark important conversations about social justice, human rights, and the evolution of ethical thought throughout history.
As we conclude our exploration of this complex and often challenging subject, I'm left with a profound sense of admiration for the wisdom and foresight embedded within these ancient texts.
Yes.
The principles of gradual reform, spiritual incentive, and unwavering commitment to justice offer valuable lessons
We do.
for anyone seeking to create positive social change in our own time.
Indeed, the stories and teachings we've explored provide a timeless framework for addressing a wide range of social concerns, reminding us that the pursuit of a more just and equitable world is an ongoing journey that demands our continued attention and effort.
Thank you for joining us on this Echoes of Ihsan deep dive.
Thank you.
We encourage you to continue exploring these themes, engaging with diverse perspectives, and reflecting on how the principles we've discussed can be applied to the challenges we face today.
Absolutely.
Until next time, may your pursuit of knowledge and understanding continue to illuminate your path.
A beautiful sentiment.